The Resident Evil franchise has had a remarkable second wind. After the divisive release of RE6, they simultaneously went back to basics and broke new ground with RE7. I'm not afraid to admit that at first I thought RE7 looked terrible. It looked like a shameless attempt to pander to Amnesia and Outlast fans, throwing away its unique identity to ape the look and feel of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm pleased to admit that I've never been more wrong about a game. Not only is RE7 a bona fide masterpiece, but in spite of its different direction, it feels more like the original Resident Evil than almost anything that came before. In 2017, Resident Evil was back on top. In 2019, they continued their streak of perfect 10s with the unanimously loved RE2 remake. Unfortunately, the remake of RE3 didn't fare so well. It seemed rushed, both in how fast it came out after RE2 and how much was cut from the original. But for what it's worth, I absolutely adored the remake of RE3. Yeah, it's a bit of a mess, but I have a huge soft spot for it, and of all the games on the RE engine, it's easily the one I've played the most. But I can't say I feel as charitable towards Resident Evil Village. I know I'm very likely in the minority here, but I think the 8th mainline RE title might be the worst in the series. It was clearly made with love, and there's an impressive level of polish on display here, but it does so much to shoot itself in the foot. Even a series as silly as Resident Evil has to be at least partially grounded in believability. I could accept one, maybe two of the creatures in Village, but to have werewolves, sword-wielding ghouls, vampires, bug ladies, living ventriloquist dummies, Lovecraftian abominations, cyborgs, some guy with Akira powers, a fucking dismembered baby, and a century-old witch in one game, all hand-waved away with some bullshit about magic mold, was just asking a bit too much of me. All the goodwill they had accumulated over the past few games, this bold new direction they had set up in 7, all to be thrown away one game later. And I'm afraid they've painted themselves in a corner that might be a bit too hard to get out of. Also, for a game subtitled Village, you'd think the village would be important to the story or central to the gameplay somehow. What we got instead was the shallowest, most forgettable setting in a series known for having memorable, beautifully realized settings. I generally make a point not to talk shit in my videos, but I couldn't help myself here. This has gotten way off track. Earlier this year, after scrapping development and starting over, the remake of RE4 was finally released. Thankfully, it might just be the single best RE game ever made. I could go on forever about how unbelievably good it is, but that's not what this video is about. After the success of the RE4 remake, and if the end of that game is any indication, it's fair to say that Capcom has every intention of continuing the remake line. It might not be the first cab off the rank, but RE5 is virtually guaranteed to get the remake treatment at this point. The various criticisms of RE5 are all justified, but personally, I love this game. I think the key to enjoying games like RE5 and 6 is to meet them on their own level. Let them show you what they have to offer, as opposed to expecting them to scratch the same itch that RE4 or RE2 might. Beating RE5 with one of my best friends is one of my most cherished gaming memories, and I think a huge part of why it was so enjoyable is because we experienced RE5 the way it was intended. The focus on co-op is immediately apparent, as is the shift from horror to action, but something I feel is often overlooked is Resident Evil 5's dedication to fun. There's an arcadey feel to the game, for lack of a better word, and a constant unfolding string of novel ideas. Pseudo open world boat areas, turret gun levels, sniping sections, clever boss battles, Indiana Jones style temple puzzles, and way more that I can't be asked thinking of that make for incredible moments of couch co-op fun. Now with that out of the way, I think it should be clear that this approach to Resident Evil probably isn't going to fly a second time around. Like RE3, when RE5 gets the remake treatment, there's going to be some broad sweeping changes to the source material. Here's how I think it could go. The biggest change has to be to the original's co-op focus. It'll still be there, but I think the emphasis on co-op will be pared down considerably. Sheva will be present the entire time, but I think her role in the single-player campaign will be closer to Ashley's role in the RE4 remake, but with a gun. I think a good way to go about it would be to give her companion role a lot of customizability. Players could create different builds for her and shift between them to suit the situation. Have her hang back with a sniper rifle and cover Chris as he runs into the open. Or have her stick close to him, watching his 6 and picking up all the items while he focuses on combat. This could be expanded on to become a central element of gameplay. One of the most frustrating elements of the original was trying to beat certain bosses in single player that were dependent on the cooperation of 2 human players. In the remake, this could be circumvented in single player by having certain builds or commands fulfill those roles. Have Sheva distract the boss while you go about laying traps, pulling levers, or picking up items. Or have her attack the boss from the opposite side of wherever you are, allowing her to get a full view of the boss's weak point while it's busy fighting you. I think the inventory system's likely to be scrapped too. I don't know if they'll bring back RE4's case system, but they'll definitely give us more space and make the annoying real-time inventory management of RE5 less present in the moment-to-moment gameplay. In short, co-op will always be an option, but the game will be built with equal or greater attention paid to the single-player experience. One huge criticism of RE5, and the over-the-shoulder RE games in general, is how action took precedence over horror. This is something the RE4 remake took pains to rectify, and in my opinion, managed to massively improve the atmosphere and horror elements, while preserving and really improving the action. I'm confident RE5 will receive that same treatment, because frankly, it needs it more. A lot of work is gonna have to go into finding its new identity though. The original's emphasis on action over horror, as well as the simple fact that Chris is never alone, means that they have their work cut out for them. But the DNA of the original has to be felt in every part of the remake, so there is a limit to just how much they can alter in pursuit of horror. I have theories on how this could work, but they're mostly wishful thinking. I'd love to see a narrowing of scope, as it would allow for a much deeper experience. Let us spend more time in the city, flesh it out, make it all a bit more interconnected. Not like RE2's police station, but more akin to the village in the RE4 remake. Like RE4, you won't so much backtrack as loop back around to earlier areas. I think having less space, but utilizing it better, makes for a more believable and memorable setting. And Resident Evil games, classic and modern alike, live and die off the strength of their settings. The Raccoon City Police Station and the Spencer Mansion are more fleshed out and realized than the characters that explore them, and the games are richer for it. Give RE5's locations that same love instead of constantly breezing from one place to the next. You could easily remix the various moments and locations of RE5's first few chapters to be more interconnected. One upshot of this approach is the pacing. As opposed to bouncing from one action set piece to another, I feel like this time around there would be a more dynamic flow of gameplay. Slower moments, dripping with palpable tension, as Chris and Sheva quietly walk through empty streets and alleyways. It'd make the more Michael Bay-esque set pieces much more memorable, as well as lending an air of panicked terror to the moment-to-moment action. It's not a perfect analog, but the quiet moments between hordes in Left 4 Dead is a good example of what I'm getting at. The downside of this approach is it would mean cutting out a significant chunk of the original game, but honestly, I don't think that's so bad. They cut a lot from the remake of RE3, and while I wish they didn't, it certainly wasn't a deal breaker for me. RE5 has so much more to cut, and if they compress those elements, meaning keep them in but trim the fat and maybe shuffle their position in the story, the game can, in a sense, have its cake and eat it too. I'm currently replaying RE5 for the third time with a friend, and I've got to say it does start to drag around the middle, so a shorter game doesn't always equal a worse game. And they could always take another leaf out of the RE4 Remake's book and have the cut content show up in the DLC. Desperate Escape was really disappointing to me. Josh Stone is such an underrated and underutilized character, and Jill Valentine is my all-time favorite Resident Evil protagonist. Give them the DLC campaign they deserve. Flesh it out, give it all the cool moments from the original RE5 that didn't make it into the remake, like what the RE4 remake did with the overhauled Separate Ways DLC. Anyway, this has gone on way longer than I intended it to. It's no secret that I'm a huge Resident Evil fan, but while the original trilogy is where my heart is, I'm also a massive fan of RE4, 5 and 6, and I think those last two games in particular get a bad rap, so I guess I'm more invested than most in seeing Capcom get them right this time around. Thanks for listening to a sad old man rant about a game that doesn't exist. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.